Welcome back to the BlackLetter podcast. We set out to create an entertaining and exciting podcast about law and business, and I think we've done it. BlackLetter, the name, comes from the Gothic typeset that was originally used in the Gutenberg press. Over time, BlackLetter became the only font that English law books were printed in. Everything else was printed in regular type. It made it harder for kind of the common person to understand what the English law books said. BlackLetter came to represent something that was law, that was set in stone, that was a sort of old and a well-settled fundamental principle of law. We're here to demystify BlackLetter law. We're here to demystify things that happen in business and law and where those two meet. And I hope you have fun listening. Welcome back to BlackLetter, our podcast. Today with me in the studio, I've got Mr. Ellis Bennett and Mr. Ben Barlow. Mr. Bennett is an attorney with Dunlap Bennett Ludwig, as is Mr. Barlow. Mr. Bennett was an attorney with the Judge Advocate General Corps of the U.S. Army. He prosecuted cases in Guantanamo Bay, Fort Benning, all over the place for the U.S. Army, and then was a federal prosecutor in Alexandria, Virginia. Mr. Bennett has held a top secret clearance in the past. And Mr. Barlow with me today, former attorney for the NSA, National Security Agency, also held a top secret clearance, also compartmentalized clearance and full poly. So we would say TSSCI, full scope poly, which is a mouthful. We're here to talk about security clearances. And for my listening audience, I myself held a top secret clearance for 9 years. Crazy. I can't believe they gave it to me, but they did. That was when I was in the Army. But I'm going to learn a little bit more about kind of the underpinnings of security clearances, what is a security clearance, who needs one, how to keep it or avoid losing it, and if you do lose it, how you might be able to get it back. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Jared Kushner, maybe, because he has some security clearance stuff going on, the president does, that is interesting in a legal sense. We're not going to dive into any political sensitivities here, but we will talk about it in a legal sense. So thank you guys for joining me. So let's, I guess, kick it off with a kind of underpinning question so we can set the stage for the audience. What is a security clearance? Actually, you know what? Back up. What is TS?
Top secret.
Okay. So this is because in the land of security clearance, we're like in the military world, we're in the alphabet soup world of NSA and JAG, and so TS is top secret. What is SCI?
Sensitive compartmented information.
Okay, so now we've established the acronyms. We have top secret, SCI, and then what is a full scope poly?
Well, really, even you mentioned JAG and sort of our experience in the intelligence community, but polygraphs, well, let's back up a step. Security clearances are something that's used throughout the government. There's employees at Homeland Security, Department of the Interior, there's EPA attorneys. There are people all over the federal government, especially in this area that we're in Northern Virginia, that have need for security clearances. But then some agencies, usually in the intelligence community, have a security clearance that relies also on a polygraph examination, a lie detector for the employees that would hold it. And you can have two different types of polygraph examinations. You can have a CI, a counterintelligence polygraph that will just sort of be a lie detector test about whether you've turned over information to sketchy people in the past, or you can have a lifestyle polygraph that gets more into questions about what have you done, what crimes might you have committed sometime in the past. When you add both of those, the CI and the lifestyle poly together, you have the sort of the most arduous form of polygraph.
Full scope
and that
poly.
becomes a full scope poly.
Yeah, those are crazy. So is that what you had, a full scope poly, right?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So Ben was secret squirrel at the NSA for 6 years. So now we've kind of cleared the air about acronyms. I think we've got that established. So what is a security clearance? Why do you need one? Who issues it? What is it?
Well, essentially, what it is, it's the government's way to make sure you're trustworthy and you're not going to spill the beans to some other government, whatever those are. I mean, some people, various levels of clearance, which Ben got into a little earlier, which are confidential, secret, top secret, and then the top secret SCI, which he talked about. Most people have the lower level ones. And I read a statistic to keep this exciting.
Exciting statistic.
Yeah, exciting statistic.
Well, I will share with our viewers that this is not Coca-Cola in these glasses that we have here. This is, in fact, Widow's Peak Bourbon from upstate New York, I think. Yeah. So it's already exciting, Ellis.
It is
okay.
exciting.
So what's your statistic? Share.
Well, I think around 60% of government employees and contractors have some type of security clearance. So that's hundreds of thousands of people. So literally that many people's jobs and livelihoods depend on this clearance process. And it can go wrong from the very beginning, and hopefully we can get into that. A lot of times people are not completely forthcoming, and a lot of times it's innocent.
Well, so let me just understand this fully. Hundreds of thousands of people have security clearances. Who gives them that clearance?
The government. Department of Defense primarily. It's also
Okay.
Office of Personnel Management has a role in it, and the DNI, Defense National Intelligence.
Department of National Intelligence.
Yeah, sorry.
So DNI, DOD, and OPM.
Exactly.
Just want to make sure we have Office of Personnel Management, Department of Defense, and Directorate of National Intelligence.
Yeah.
So we've got lots of acronyms, and they issue, control. Who revokes security clearances?
Those same entities,
Okay.
essentially, and they all the processes work almost exactly the same. Different decision makers within those organizations implement the policy, but the policy is
How do you get a security
universal.
clearance? I'm a contractor. I'm an Army officer. I remember I had to fill out a 300 seeming page form, an SF-86 on paper. Of course, this was not recently. This was the Clinton administration to get my first security clearance. But how do you do it now? How do you get a security clearance these days?
It's still that same basic process, and it might take, it might be a little bit helpful. I don't know for the listeners if we even take one step back.
Yeah, let's do it.
So many people will understand exactly what we're talking about. But
Okay.
take this area, the D.C. metro area up in Howard County, Maryland, where I live, all of Northern Virginia. I have so many people whose livelihoods depend on government employment.
Right.
Usually the first step to getting government employment for a huge portion of those jobs is to get a security clearance. Once you get a security clearance, you get your foot in the door, you're able to move around the government at will. But the security clearance is really the gateway to entering government employment or even private sector contractor
So
employment.
any employment, or like if I'm going to be a secretary at the Department of Homeland Security, will I have to have a security clearance?
Depends on where you will be the secretary. That
Okay.
if you're a secretary at NSA, if you're a secretary at CIA, you'll probably have to have some level of clearance. If you're
Okay.
a contractor entering that space, if you're going within the gate at,
Okay.
out at Langley or up at Fort Meade, you probably have to either have a blue badge, which means you're an IC employee and you have a security clearance, or you have a contractor clearance.
Okay.
So people, once so you want a job with the government, you think you want a job because they're high paying with a contractor that has jobs in the intelligence community. You apply for the job. They come back, say you need a security clearance. And so they give you a lot of paperwork, a huge form called the SF-86. Yet another
This
acronym.
isn't digital yet?
It's still, at least when I did it, you still had to do a lot of hard copy stuff.
So I'm curious. I actually have no idea what this stands for. What is the SF for?
Standard form.
Oh, Standard Form 86. Nice.
It's the government.
That's very
making
government.
complex the pretty simple.
That's OPM choosing the SF.
And so the SF-86,
DoD.
really when you're filling out that information, it wouldn't be a lot different than people who are applying for different jobs, that you're filling out a more detailed, but basically an employment history. You're filling out a detailed listing of where you've lived. But the interesting part is you're also writing down who you've known at those addresses. Because once you turn your SF-86 in, they'll assign it to an investigator who will follow up and ask questions of your neighbors. They'll make sure that you're not a risk.
So it's sort of 1984, George Orwell.
Yeah, kind of a resume from hell meets a fair level of suspicion.
Have you seen Gattaca?
Yeah, I did see Gattaca.
The Keanu Reeves.
actually.
It's probably an out-of-date reference, but kind of like Gattaca a little bit. Like they're controlling everybody. And I guess they're not controlling, but they're into your life pretty deeply when you get a security clearance.
Yeah.
So why do you need a security clearance? I mean, you said to be employed by the government or to be a contractor, but can you be, what if you lose your security clearance and you're a contractor employed by the government?
the reason you have a security clearance is so that you can have access to protected information that has been classified at some level or another. We have basic information that might be classified at a low level, up to the military, up to the nuclear codes that you think about the president carrying around in his football. They would be at the highest level of classification.
So, for example, if I don't have a security clearance right now, I couldn't have those nuclear codes, could I?
I hope not.
Even if I want them.
I'm not sure I'd give you the nuclear codes with a security clearance.
But what about? Never mind.
No, but that's exactly why it's so important that if you have a job and you have a security clearance that says you can have access to information at your job, if you do anything that causes you to lose your security clearance, all of a sudden you can't perform your basic job functions. You can't have access to the facilities that you need to, or the information that's at those facilities. And
so you can't work. Your security clearance is your livelihood.
It is. It's your license to work in the government.
It's your license to work for the government, in the government, with the government. So let me ask you this, Ellis, how do you lose your security clearance?
You lose it essentially by the government learning of something that makes them to question your responsibility.
Gotcha.
And really,
so you can do bad stuff. You just have to keep it secret? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's something that people do try to do, and it ends up making it worse. So,
they tend to fail.
They tend to fail because what happens in the security clearance process is every 5 years at least, there's a reinvestigation. And at that point, they run your credit report again, and they do a criminal history report. So if you have not disclosed some violation that occurred between the time you were granted a clearance initially and when that PR...
Speeding tickets. What if I got some speeding tickets? I'm embarrassed. I don't disclose them. Am I going to lose my clearance?
If it's just a regular speeding violation, you probably don't have to report that to your security officer. If there's reckless driving or some extra factor that might call into question your responsibility, you should probably tell your security officer.
So there's my question then. Is it better to get ahead of the game and tell your security officer that you might have a problem with your clearance and risk your livelihood? Or is it kind of better to be like, maybe they won't find out and, see what happens, kind of adopt a wait and see approach?
Yeah, better to get ahead of it and really getting ahead of it from the very first time you apply for a security clearance, because there's really an art to filling out the SF-86. Mm-hmm. It asks standard questions. Where have you lived? Do you drink alcohol?
Have you ever sold secrets to the Chinese?
It doesn't ask that specific question.
I feel like you should.
That would be bad.
Seems like it would be a good question to ask.
That would be a good question to ask. They do ask if you have allegiance to the U.S., so you'd probably have to answer no to that question. If
the allegiance to the U.S. thing, if you're being honest.
So, like
you'd have to have secrets in the first place.
Yeah, when you're filling out that SF-86, then virtually everyone you run into, I don't know if Jesus went for a security clearance, but everybody else you run into has something in their background that they're a little bit worried about.
Pretty sure Jesus doesn't have a clearance.
It's
not a U.S. national. It's not technically. Can't get one.
That's true.
I don't think he's eligible.
Well, and there are two reasons.
Actually, it's interesting.
You have to be a U.S. citizen, and you can't be a persistent current drug user. Those two things are automatically
Jesus was a
disqualified.
drug user?
Jesus.
What? No, I'm not calling.
They'll take care of
there
that.
are two reasons. He fits the first category.
Oh, I see. Yeah, he's not a U.S. citizen. I'm with you. Yep.
No,
so,
I
fair point.
Don't want to cast aspersions.
But so you have to fill out this SF-86 that asks for exhaustive detail of anything that you might have done wrong. So it really becomes an art at how you describe the things that you've done wrong in your life. And I know this is BlackLetter. It's not a plug for DBL, but one of the ways that we help a lot of clients that come in the door is to figure out how you write the SF-86, how you put down the information,
how you disclose to your security officer.
Exactly. And then, so we help on that. We help on that level. And then when the day comes where someone's done something that they're trying to figure out, how do I report this to my security officer? That's where we'll talk to clients again, and we'll advise them on how best to share that information in a way that makes your employer think, hey, here's an upstanding person who might have done something wrong, but this isn't somebody who's trying to get away with something that we have to worry about their access to information.
It's all about mitigation, and they use the term called the whole person concept. So that's really, and it's a loose criteria basically. But if someone is a drug user, you want to do your best to mitigate that. It was years ago. It was only marijuana. It wasn't cocaine. All those things. And there is an art to presenting it. And the way the investigators who actually go out and talk to the witnesses who know these people write the reports, they're typically only writing down the negative stuff. They're not putting in the things to explain the reasons.
Was a good citizen, was helping people in Peace Corps when he smoked 3 pounds of marijuana.
Exactly. And people, when they fill out their SF-86, they may have been in the Peace Corps and have all those things and could have people write it up. They don't realize they could submit that with their application. No one usually tells them that. But, it's better to get out in front of it and show the government how good a person you are.
I will share sort of a horrible story, and I'll let you two guys opine on this. This is so long ago, and it's so past, and it didn't actually apply to me, so it's okay that I share it. But I had
your friend. Here's the story about your friend.
I may have been in a military institution at one time, and I was filling out an SF-86, and I wasn't yet a second lieutenant. I was moving into that, and we had something called a TAC officer. And he said, "Do you see that question, candidates, where it says, 'Did you smoke marijuana?'" And everyone said, "Yes, sir." And "You did not smoke marijuana." And somebody put their hand up and said, "But put your hand down." So that was the conversation I had. So I feel like at the time, that particular person who was raising their hand was being advised not to report something when they were applying on their SF-86. Now, I'm not saying that was the right move. And I kind of say it because it was pretty funny that actually that guy was raising his hand and it seemed fairly obvious he did not want questions at that point.
Well, and actually it's a topic for a different day, but that is dealing with an issue that's different, that the way we treat members of the military who are going for security clearances versus members of the general public.
Oh, is that different?
It's very different because say that I'm not going to talk so much from my experience because
NSA, can't talk about it.
I made an affirmation that I wouldn't talk about some things. But say somebody's working at CIA, and CIA and NSA are both joint service environments. NSA is completely joint, which means that you have members of the military who are working side by side, members of the general public. But a contractor at NSA who has a security clearance, or even a civilian employee at NSA who has a security clearance, and a military member who's working at one of these intelligence facilities that has a security clearance, their security clearances are the same, but they're different. And the way that they're different is for agencies that require a polygraph that we talked about earlier to have your security clearance. Especially agencies that require a full scope polygraph. Remember, we said that's the combination of the
lifestyle,
the counterintelligence with the lifestyle. Yep. Military members, though, just take the CI polygraph. They just take the CI
just the
part.
Counterintelligence.
And so, at some of our intelligence facilities, where you have people retire from the military and then try to come back into the contractor workforce. They'll be taking a lifestyle poly for the first time.
And they'll be getting dinged on their lifestyle poly.
And so you'll have a lot of people who get dinged on a lifestyle poly and aren't granted a security clearance when they've had a security clearance for 20 years.
So could we make you... So you don't have a clearance now, right? Because you've been out of the NSA for a few years. Yeah. So if I asked you, what'd you do at the NSA, could you tell me?
No, because in my...
So what did you do at the NSA?
I could kill you. No,
I don't think that's fair.
In our intelligence communities like CIA, FBI, Secret Service.
It's not like you're going to lose your clearance.
NSA.
If you tell me.
Even though you don't have an active security clearance, there's some when you take your oath of office or affirmation, as I did, when you enter into service, there are some lifelong obligations that you take on.
So do I have those too?
I don't know what you agreed to.
If I had a TS clearance in the military?
I don't know.
It'd be good to know, right?
In the IC, the intelligence community.
I don't know anything.
Things I agreed to do for the rest of my life is that I wouldn't disclose confidential information that I'd received or classified information that I received in the course of my employment, that I would always subject anything that I write pre-publication review. That means that if I put a paragraph on my resume about what I did when I came to Dunlap Bennett Ludwig, when I'm writing down a paragraph about what I did,
just like we did for Bob Ettinger, who was at CIA, one of our partners at Dunlap Bennett Ludwig, was at the CIA.
You constantly have to worry about and what I put. And what I'm putting down on paper, is that something that I've put down before on paper and it's been approved, or is it something new where I'm going to have to contact people? So that's why if you're hiring a lot of people from the IC, they'll try not to write stuff down because they don't.
Acronym pause. IC, Intelligence Community. Yep. But people in the IC say the IC all the time. And I'm thinking Orange County, but like, it's like Ithaca County or something like that, like somewhere that's not as nice, but it's the intelligence community, right? Okay.
So especially when I talk about like the difference between the civilian members and military members going for their security clearance, it becomes especially important then for military members that are then having to refill out information that they might want to check with somebody and get advice of how do I explain now for the first time that I've smoked pot, that I've done other things.
Not that you have, but that this
hypothetical person did.
Right. So that's the front end of security clearance. Is the back end. You lose your security clearance. I know for a fact that Ellis Bennett, you have never lost a security clearance case. You're not allowed to say that, but I know it's true. And you've successfully defended every single security clearance revocation you've ever litigated. How do you do that? How do you get back your clearance? How do you defend a revocation?
I mean, I think the reason for that success in litigating these cases is I've had people who have really just not disclosed the mitigating evidence at the beginning. And that's where people, it's a process where people just don't get out in front of disclosing their negative information a lot of times. And it's a lot of times it's just because they don't think of it and they're answering the questions that are on the paper. And
I'm seeing a theme between you and Ben here. The theme is disclose ahead of time, mitigation. In everything you're saying, how you answer questions, how you deal with a revocation. So thank you to our sponsor today, Dunlap Bennett Ludwig. Dunlap Bennett Ludwig solves complex business problems with smart solutions, acting as advocates and advisors to their clients with diverse professional backgrounds, from MBAs to PhDs to bankers to military officers. Real-world experience for real-world problems. Dunlap Bennett Ludwig, doing better law. To find out more, visit www.dbllawyers.com. So I think, I don't know if we've beat the security clearance horse to death, but the other question I had for you guys was something related to security clearances about debarment. Can you tell me how do you get barred in the first place? We're not talking about an attorney's bar because you don't really get barred, but you can be debarred. So what is that?
So it's a related concept for companies typically. And debarment is usually a 3-year, you can't be a government contractor anymore. 3 years, not suspension, 3 years.
So is that companies, people?
It's both. Typically, a lot of these government contractors are 1 or 2 or 3 people companies at the beginning. But if the owner of the company is debarred, the company's debarred.
Okay.
So, and there's another concept that's related.
Where do I find out who's debarred?
On SAM, which is,
Is that a person? System for Award Management?
That's it. That's it. Yeah, I couldn't remember that.
I know like one thing, apparently.
But anyone can look it up.
It's not even secret.
It's a federal database for government contractors.
Okay, sam.gov.
Sam.gov, that's
See who's debarred. So if somebody's debarred, if I'm a private, should I not do business with them too? If they can't work for the government? Or what does that mean? How did they get debarred?
Private companies can decide what they want to do. It's very broad. They can get debarred for any number of things, not paying their taxes. Most of the time, it happens when a company has been investigated for some sort of criminal conduct. A lot of times it's fraud.
Okay.
And
so that's not good?
That's not good. And in those situations, which is probably why I have a good track record, I haven't taken those individuals on as clients because those are tough ones to overcome.
But a recent case that we did take on just in the last year.
Debarment case?
We had.
Okay, tell me about it.
Individual that had workplace difficulties with the supervisor. Supervisor ends up running him through HR. He gets fired, but then the supervisor takes the additional step of submitting his name for investigation of whether he should be on the debarment list. He gets added to the debarment list. His whole future's in jeopardy. He comes to us and says, really, I just had a workplace squabble with my boss. What do I do about this?
So this is like vindictive response by the boss out of out of line,
At least
probably.
that's what it seemed like on our side. His employer was a huge employer here in the Washington, D.C. metro area. But he came to us, and we were able to talk to him about what his issues were. Go through a lot of steps, a lot of appeals with the employer, and then with the folks in charge of debarment. The end result.
Now, debarment's not by DOD or OPM. That's by agency, right? So you get debarred. Agency is if it's Homeland Security debars you.
And I believe, as I remember this case, I believe it was the Department of the Army.
Okay,
That we worked with, and the end result. It took a long time. But he's not on a debarment list.
So
now.
if you're debarred and you win and you're no longer debarred, is that undebarred?
Well,
you can be rebarred.
It could rebarred. It's a rebar.
I think it's a rebar.
So that's an iron decision.
But it's tough that so it's sort of interesting both on the debarment side and the intelligence or the clearance side that we've dealt with the debarment person. Then we also dealt with another client in the last year that worked for FBI, who the agency thought that he had driven while intoxicated. That was a huge issue.
Did he have a DUI? Was he convicted of a DUI?
He wasn't convicted of a DUI,
Oh.
but just because you're not convicted of a DUI doesn't mean that the agency, if they feel there's evidence, can't find that you're responsible for a DUI. So in this case, even though he had not been charged through the judicial process with a DUI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation felt that the evidence was sufficient to determine that he should no longer have his clearance. And so we looked into that matter, just like we did on the debarment side, went through the process, usually lengthy processes to get somebody cleared in those steps. But going through appeals, you end up.
So he was eventually cleared and reinstated with his security clearance?
Well, he didn't lose his security clearance. As I recall, through a number of appeals, we ended up with a 40-day suspension reduced to a one-day suspension because I don't think the government wanted to go too far in admitting that it was wrong, but they were wrong.
So current events, last thing I want to hit on with you guys because it's exciting and it's current. I saw in the news that somebody named Kushner, is that the guy's name? Have you guys heard of him? Have you heard of him? We're using law coasters, so this protects us. But he had a security clearance instated, right? Against the recommendation of the IC, against the recommendation of DOD, something like that.
We're not exactly
so Alice, you know,
sure,
okay. So tell me what you know.
There's reporting a lot of differing accounts of this. But
so what happened?
I mean,
what do we know?
What we do know is that he's amended his SF-86, that form we keep hearing about several times, to include things that weren't originally included, which kind of gets back to our theme. Full disclosure at the beginning.
So he got a good lawyer after doing it.
He has one of the best lawyers, Abby Lowell, one of the best attorneys in the D.C. metro area.
Besides you.
But
so let me ask you this. So what things did he disclose? What do we know?
Well,
what additional
I'm not
things?
Exactly sure. I think it has to do with foreign influence,
foreign
contacts, foreign influence, possibly financial entanglement with foreign countries. It's been
Russia
reported.
or
I've seen different countries that he might have investments in.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to get into the details.
One of the parts of if you have a security clearance and you're working at the in the IC, the intelligence community, one of the things that's an ongoing obligation is that you have to report to your security officer foreign contacts that you might have. And for people who don't work in that world, it might seem strange, but there are a lot of other people working who are afraid if they start talking to somebody at a bar in an airport and it turns out that they're from China, that all of a sudden they're going to have to wonder, do I need to report this to my security officer at work or not?
What's the answer?
At least from what I read in the Jared Kushner situation is that maybe there have been 40 times where he's had to update his SF-86 to disclose that he's had a foreign contact.
40 times?
I thought that was something I heard this morning.
And that's not that unusual for someone like him that has
that travels internationally. Huge business.
I gotcha.
But you have to report.
So is the media overblowing it to some degree? There's kind of a combination.
Well, you never know. Things are so polarized in the news today.
Really?
But for instance, I know you're getting ready to go on this amazing trip to South America. If you had your security clearance and you're in South America and you're in Ecuador.
Oh, I'm not talking to anyone.
In Quito, and you talk to somebody in a restaurant.
Not talking to anyone.
if you had your security clearance, you would come back and you would think, okay, I need to list that I spoke to these 6 people in substance, not just sort of a passing conversation. And evidently, the Kushners, from what I understand outside of politics, is that they have a huge business empire, lots of activities overseas. And so it's not strange to think that someone would have a lot of foreign contacts that they need to update their form with. But evidently, his foreign contacts were to a degree that made people wonder about whether he might be subject to foreign influence. And that's one of the factors that you look at to determine whether or not to give somebody a security clearance. And I just know what I've read in the Washington Post. And the Post articles evidently suggest that there was enough of a worry about whether he would be subject to undue influence that the official recommendation to the president was that he not be granted a security clearance. And then the president trumped that. And decided that maybe
good
he
adjective.
should have one.
I think that was a good use of an adjective. Or adverb.
Trumped it.
At the end of the day, the president as chief executive has the authority to grant anyone a clearance.
He does.
And it's been reported that he, against the advice of his close confidants, including General Kelly, granted the clearance. And it's disputed, I think, but there's reporting.
But what you guys are both saying that it's not unusual for him to have those contacts, and likely nothing wrong. But if he was a normal, regular guy, he probably wouldn't get his clearance because this IC would be like, well, it's not unusual. We're not saying it's a problem, but that's just too much.
Yeah,
and we can't deal with it.
He has the fortunate situation of having a father-in-law that's the president of the United States that most other people don't have a father-in-law that's president. That. And so when that decision comes down from either the IC, the top people in the IC that say, we don't think a clearance should be granted in this situation, usually there's no one that can trump that.
Yeah.
And there.
But there's, you did it again.
Yeah,
I feel like it's a thing for you.
There's no appeal process generally after that final decision's been made by the appeals board, unless you can get approval from the chief executive, which Mr. Kushner was able to walk across the hall, perhaps.
I think that's like our next level of representation is you get that kind of clearance approval.
But it gets, I don't mean to interrupt, but it gets back to, some attorney could have helped Mr. Kushner at the beginning, probably to make him understand, how important it was to list all these contacts. And
so that's the big takeaway. So big takeaways from today is get ahead of anything with clearance or debarment, report in advance yourself so that it's framed in the right way. I think that's the first big takeaway.
Yeah, I would say so. And by not listing it, not only is there potential questions about foreign influence, but there's also, it gets into another adjudicative factor, which is called personal conduct. And that encompasses...
Basically, you're lying.
Yeah, basically, did you lie on your SF-86 or did you just forget? And I think that's kind of the controversy surrounding Mr. Kushner.
And for anybody who's actually going to go through the process of seeking federal employment, you want to get ahead of the game, because if you don't disclose things, not that I had anything not to disclose. The polygraph process is not an enjoyable part of this, and usually the whole reason for the polygraph is to make things so uncomfortable that someone will admit those things that they maybe have not disclosed previously. Right. And so it's in your best interest, if you're going down this road and you have something that you're worried about,
disclose it.
To just seek out some help and
get advice from a lawyer.
Yeah, get advice from an attorney. And
so now you give me my second takeaway. Well, so I need 3 takeaways from you guys. Get ahead and mitigate. Seek advice from learned attorneys who know about security clearance stuff. Maybe former NSA attorney, former JAG, people who hold clearances. What's our third takeaway for our listening audience today?
Well,
we need 3.
I don't know. This might be 2.5. I think Ellis probably has a better one. But don't overestimate the importance of lots of things in your past. I know that, for instance, the big thing here in the D.C. region in Maryland, not so much Virginia yet. We're a little bit behind the times. But when it comes to marijuana, the legal landscape's changing quickly all over the world.
Still federally illegal, though, right?
Still federally illegal, but legal landscape's changing really quickly. And sometimes people tend to minimize that when they're thinking about it. They're thinking, hey, recreational use is legal in Washington, D.C., that we have medical use, and I have my medical card in Maryland, so what's the big deal? But just because you think it's not a big deal, and it seems like there's a lot of talk about it and normalizing of behavior, when it comes to security clearances, we still operate maybe
like it's 1952.
Yeah, and you want to take it seriously. You want to make sure that you at least get some advice and say, how should I disclose this? Because if you disclose it appropriately, chances are, if you have the skill set needed where the government wants you as an employee,
if you're a SME,
another
acronym,
subject matter expert.
Subject matter expert.
If they want you bad enough that the only way you can really screw that up is by not disclosing things the correct way.
So that's the takeaway. TSSCI for SME with CIA through DOD and OPM, you need to disclose. Is that?
That sounds about right. Yeah, I think Ben's right. I mean, if that, if you're thinking about whether you want to disclose something or you should disclose it.
Err on the side of disclosing.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming today. I think you crushed the podcast on security clearances and debarments. If you would come back sometime, we can talk about more fun and interesting stuff in cases.
Will the whiskey be available?
The whiskey will be available.
Okay.
We might switch brands. Ice is important. That's all for today's episode of BlackLetter. Thanks again for listening. Join us next time when we talk about more BlackLetter issues in creative ways. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Google Play so you never miss an episode. And to catch us on video, check out our website at blackletterstudios.com.